Okay, hello, my friends. I have seven big stories for you today. The first we're dealing with is Poltava. I said Poltava earlier in the breaking news when I first heard what was going on. I don't know that I've ever pronounced that city's name before, but it turns out it was holding something that Russia wanted to strike very badly. So here's what we first saw when the news broke. This is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, and what they put out was a little bit misleading. This morning, Russia committed a heinous and brutal crime, striking the city of Poltava and killing dozens of people. A hospital and an educational institution were the targets. By using ballistic missiles, Russian invaders left Ukrainians with almost no chance to escape. And you think, oh no, they hit the children's hospital before. What are they doing? They're doing that again. But there's a little bit more to the story. So then you see Zelensky put this out. I received preliminary reports on the Russian strike in Poltava. According to available information, two ballistic missiles hit the area. Now, I saw all kinds of things that were perhaps ranging from true to wildly untrue, including something that looked like a strike claiming to be on Poltava that had multiple missiles coming in, and that may or may not have been legitimate, because what I could track down from legitimate sources seems to show two ballistic missiles, not multiple missiles. So I'm correcting that because that's what I was explaining this morning. Unfortunately, there are many casualties. As of now, we know that 41 people were killed. I ordered a full and prompt investigation into all the circumstances of what happened. All necessary services are involved in the rescue operation. So they didn't just strike a hospital and educational institution. What they actually struck was Russian missiles killed 50 in a strike in a Ukrainian military institute. Okay, that's a different picture than a hospital and an educational institution. So at least 50 people were killed and 271 wounded when Russia hit a military institute in Ukraine's central town of Poltava with two ballistic missiles on Tuesday, the war's deadliest single attack this year. So that's very bad. Zelensky ordered a full and prompt investigation, saying the strike damaged a building of a military institute of communications. And so it's worse because these were specialists in communication. So they wiped out a lot of these specialists that they really do need. Okay, so now again, let's go back to this because there's some second order effects that we want to discuss. One, first, they were hitting a military target, and as far as that, it's terrible as that is, at least the Russians were trying to hit a military target here. But why were they hitting such a large concentration of military? Like, they should have had people more dispersed, and that means that there are spies somewhere around telling them, hey, look, there's a concentration here. And like, somebody is going to be in trouble somewhere in the military chain for allowing such a large gathering, or poor operational security or something along those lines. Okay, second big story. Ukrainian forces recently regained lost positions southeast of Pokrovsk amid continued Russian tactical gains in the area. And then they go on and talk about, but they lost ground here, but they gained ground there. Okay, they're not going to retake Pokrovsk. There's too much there. I was watching Dennis. Dennis was talking about this, and he was talking about how the Ukrainians just retook this area here and changed the color on the map, and he said this, and I want you to hear it.
For the first time, I see how Russia retreats in this region. But nevertheless, Russia has more of the resources. Now the ratio, if we speak about the soldiers, is 1 to 5. So per each Ukrainian soldier, there are 5 Russians. According to
So for each Ukrainian soldier, he said, there are 5 Russians. So the Russians really badly want Pokrovsk. Greg Terry still doesn't have quite the power that he needs to be able to do what he needs to do to get our video about Pokrovsk up. As soon as it's up, I'll let you know. Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about what's going on in the Kursk region. A Russian MP doesn't believe official Russian reports about the situation in Kursk region. He thinks the situation is much, much worse. So this is what he's saying. He says, if you pay attention, there's no mention of any of 3 days of NATO troops being thrown out of Kursk. We'll see that the government announces that 10 more villages have been evacuated. Look, if there's no offensive, why evacuate the villages? Kursk is closed. That is, the special siege regime is imposed there. Do you remember 1941, Moscow under siege? That's the analogy, only milder. What does it mean? So he's kind of inflaming the situation, saying it like Even it's worse than we think. Now, I don't know that it's as bad as he says. Here is Kurtikov and here's Kursk. We know that they're around here. We don't know that they've spread that far, but that's pretty wild for this Russian member of parliament to be saying what he's saying. Okay, next big story. Russian prosecutor's office has overturned the decision of the investigative committee to refuse to institute criminal proceedings over the death of Alexei Navalny. Okay, Navalny died, as you know, on February 16, 2024, in prison number 3. Official sources said that the cause of death of the political prisoner was a detached blood clot. But Navalny's associates in the international community are of the opinion that it was premeditated murder and Putin's personal revenge. Okay, next story. The fourth developer of Putin's hypersonic technologies has been sent to prison for treason. Now, this goes back quite a ways, this story. So Putin was bragging about these hypersonic missiles that we have that no one can shoot down, and then they were shot down. And then the developers of these hypersonic missiles were charged, these physicists were charged with treason. Now, whether they engaged in treason or not, it just seemed really weird because right after the missiles failed, they were all charged. According to Reuters, law enforcers accused the scientists of passing classified data to China at a scientific conference held in 2017. And so they're charged for things like that, but it was right after this missile failed spectacularly or was shot down spectacularly after Putin was bragging about it. And so it almost seemed like revenge. Okay, let's talk about this. John Spencer is the chair of urban warfare studies. He's at West Point, and I interviewed him early on in the war to talk about urban warfare. My article about Chef Zhenya, the famous Ukrainian chef, not only feeding an army, but also trying to transform how the Ukrainian military feeds its soldiers. And so I was intrigued by that, and I looked at it, and I want to highlight two paragraphs, because the two paragraphs really help us understand something about how Ukraine functions as opposed to how the former Soviet Union did. So Chef Zhenya, also known as Soup Daddy on social media, is a famous Ukrainian chef. When Russian forces began their weeks-long attempt to capture Kyiv on February 24, 2022, Chef Zhenya answered the call to serve like tens of thousands of other Ukrainians in the city. But instead of being handed a rifle, Chef Zhenya was given a massive kitchen near the country's primary military headquarters, where he immediately started preparing food for thousands of Kyiv's defenders. Now here's the paragraph that I found really interesting. The Soviet way, according to Chef Zhenya, caused every facet of Ukrainian society to be industrialized into assembly lines. That included food production. No longer did bakers bake bread, for example, it was produced in bread factories. This led to an erosion of cooking traditions and left an inadequate portion of society capable of food preparation and cooking, something reflected in the Ukrainian military, where even today there is no military occupational pipeline to create cooks. Now, that's almost a metaphor for what went wrong within the society, within the Soviet society, and what is going right now, because this hyper-industrialization or this concentration of factories or whatever, it's exactly the opposite of where the U.S. went with this fragmentation, where people could become entrepreneurs and grow up organically. And if this was going to work, if this system of trying to develop these large factories to do all these different things was really more efficient. Look, Russia is about half the size of the population of the US. And if it really was more efficient, then it wouldn't have the GDP of Texas. It would have greater than half the GDP of the US, just because of population to population, right? And it really doesn't. It's really significantly less productive. Now, the Ukrainians, on the other hand, aren't trying to use those old pipelines in order to do things. They're entrepreneurial, they're grassroots, they're bottom up. Nearly 100% of drones used by the armed forces are now made in Ukraine, right? Over 200 domestic companies have entered the drone industry. And this edge, this entrepreneurial edge that you're seeing right here, that is actually going to help Ukraine get an edge over their Russian counterparts when they're outgunned and overmatched in population. This entrepreneurial path is going to be stunningly good for what ails them. And you see that in the metaphor of the difference just between the industrial size kitchens or the industrial one path to, cooking all the food to what they're actually trying to do in that article. I hope that made sense. The Ukrainian parliament has approved the creation of Unmanned Systems Forces, a new military branch integrating various unmanned and robotic systems. So that's organically growing into its own branch as well. Okay. Next article. We've been talking about this for the last couple of days. Mongolia was meant to arrest Russia's President Putin last night. It didn't. Now it's in trouble. Of course, nothing's going to happen, but nothing was going to happen to Putin either. Mongolia has now found itself in hot water as Putin visits the country. His first visit to an ICC member state since the arrest warrant was issued with apparent impunity. Under the Rome Statute, the founding treaty of the ICC that came into effect in 2002, ICC member states are obliged to detain and surrender to the court any persons who are subject to an ICC arrest warrant if they set foot on their soil. The court has no way to enforce the rule. It's a paper tiger, it just is. It's like the UN. However, and Mongolia defied it by welcoming Putin with the guard of honor. Okay, so that's what Mongolia did. So what'll happen to Mongolia? Not a whole lot, but Russia mocked the ICC, and Putin knew that nothing was going to happen. Of course, Putin would never have traveled there if there was any chance of arrest, and the country had already assured Moscow the president would not be detained. So we knew that nothing was going to happen all the way through, but okay, that's where we are. Okay, so the ICC will prove to be a paper tiger, and again, where will Putin be tried? Hopefully in Kyiv when the war is over. Okay, last little bit. I thought this was humorous because Putin's always talking about historical Russian lands. Darth Putin, the parody channel, put out this, made the mistake of discussing Russia's historical borders with Mongolians. Yeah, it's kind of like that. They can make that claim too. All right, my friends, thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.